It's the lens, it's the lens, it's the lens, gotta live diverse. It's the lens, it's the lens, it's the lens, live diverse. You are listening to The Lens Living Diverse, a podcast brought to you by the CNIB advocacy team. Join Nisha, Vivi, and I as we speak to individuals with intersecting identities who live with sight loss as they share their unique stories. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of The Lens Living Diverse. I am your host for today. I'm going to be doing it solo, your host, Ben, and we have a special episode of The Lens Living Diverse. I bet everybody always hears me say special episode because I always feel that every episode is special to me. But today we're going to be talking about Black parenthood and having that intersecting identity of sight loss incorporated with it. So I am lucky enough to have an amazing guest. I like to call him the soul of Black Voices United. Sultry voice, always has trivia going on, always knows his stuff. So I'm going to introduce you to a good friend of mine, Martin, for today's episode. So Martin, how you doing today?
I'm doing very good, Ben. Thank you for the lovely introduction. Hello, everybody. Hello. I am Martin Springer. Just so you know, I am visually impaired. Also a Black man, just so you guys know. Father, I have 5 kids, 3 biological, 2 adopted. I also work, but currently I'm off on LTD. So I do work, I do IT work for the government. And, that's me in a nutshell. Also, I like long walks and, candlelight dinners.
Exactly. Hey, getting dating profile on the Lens Living Diverse today.
Let everybody know who I am.
Exactly. So, Martin, thank you so much for being here today. And we're going to have really good conversations because I know we spoke previously and you just have such an amazing story with your journey with sight loss. So, is it possible you could share with the listeners a little bit about that journey?
Sure. I officially lost my sight just about almost at the end of summer of 2016. Currently, don't know what caused my sight loss. I like to say that I'm a modern medical mystery. I have seen a plethora of doctors. I've seen the top 2 neuro ophthalmologists in Ontario. I've seen a neurologist. I've seen a geneticist. I've seen ophthalmo no respiratory doctor for potential respiratory disease. I saw an optiplasty. You name it, I pretty much have seen the doctor, and I've been poked, prodded. I've probably have given about a gallon's worth of blood, had 6 MRIs, done a CT scan, a gallium scan, had my muscles probed. I've had a biopsy done on my tear gland and my muscles, which was not fun either. So, yeah, it's not been easy. My sight loss originally started in like 2012. It was a very slow digression. It was just like a really slow decline in my sight. It started off with the narrowing of my field of vision, but it was every 6 months to 3 months, and then over a period of time, it picked up really quickly. It went from like once a month to like once a week. And then it was like after that, it was like every other day. And then it has become daily. And it was like really stressful because it affected not only, my home life, my work life, it affected everything.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because still from this day, you don't know what caused it at all.
No, no, and it's always funny. Anytime I go see any doctor, they're like, we still talk about you. We always we bring your case up at conventions, and when I
Mm,
go to seminars and conferences, and like everybody's scratching their head, and it's quite interesting because I was having a conversation with a friend the other night about this, and she was telling me how her family literally, mortgaged all their money just to find out what was wrong with her because she saw doctors here and they didn't know what
mm.
was going on, and they flew her to the UK, and within 5 minutes of walking into the doctor's office, the doctor looks at her file and goes, oh yeah, you have this.
Wow.
So I mean, short sight from me, bankrupting myself to go, and check a doctor on the other side of the pond, it would be nice, but you know we'll have to see. Hopefully, at some point down the road, they will, find out something. Like a few doctors have told me that, stem cell, research is coming along slowly. So yeah,
Yeah, and
well,
and you know what? It's very interesting that you make mention, and it almost is that idea of the Canadian medical system, how here in Canada or even the North or in North America, they can't find what's going on. And then you have a friend who goes all the way across the pond and it's just like, oh, that's what you have, right? So that that's very telling of our medical system here.
yeah, I find it's partly of training, and then I think it's also uh, the other side of you know value it, what's the best way to say it, they don't really value that level of expertise or uniqueness in the practice that they do, because experimentation on this side is a little bit more, it's not as fluid as it is, like say in the UK or Europe in itself.
Like I said, very interesting that you went through that whole process from blood work to biopsies to MRIs. So I feel like you've been through the gamut, my friend.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've learned to appreciate people who go in the MRI machine much more now, because the first time I went in there, I felt so uncomfortable and claustrophobic
Mm,
because they had to put my face. They put your head in that, like it's a block where they keep it so it sits straight, and then they give you the headphones to put in, and they lock your head in, and then they put a cage on top of your head so you
mm,
can't move, and you're lying flat. So not
mhm.
only you're trying to, like, they're telling you don't move, don't move. My throat's getting dry, and I'm trying not to cough.
Yeah.
And then you're sitting there, and they say, oh, it's going to take 15 minutes. The longest one I had was about like 40 minutes,
Jeez.
and
Wow.
it was a long time. And I remember it was the 40-minute one was where I had the nicest technician, period. All the other technicians, I had 6 MRIs, I had one nice technician. She was
Mm,
really nice. She said, okay, you need anything? She went and got me water, and she had, brought the water so I could have a couple of sips of water. So when I was done, she rolled me out, let me give me a few minutes. Other ones would just let me sit in the tube.
mm.
They didn't want me to come out, and they're like, oh no, you're moving too much. And I'm like, yeah, that's what's happening. And she goes, okay, if you need to move around, we'll pull you out, let you shift a little bit, and then you can go back in. And yeah, I think that was the last MRI I had, and it was like the best MRI I had since. I told her, I remember telling her, I was like, can you do all my MRIs?
And definitely shout outs to that nice engineer, what is it? I guess medical engineer who was good to Martin. So if you're listening, shout outs.
Yes,
Shouts,
yes.
shouts to the wonderful service. So I'm just gonna go into the next question. And here at the Lens, we always speak about having that uh, intersecting identity between race and disability. And one that I had a couple of guests on the show who are Black men, and just that different experience of being a Black man with sight loss. So I want to ask you, what was your type of experience being a Black man who recently lost his sight, and what were the challenges of that?
Well, that's interesting. I mean, you're not only carrying the single weight of being, a black male, now you're carrying the single weight of also being, disabled black male. So that makes things even more heavier on you. And, it's different because, you're trying to do your best to put yourself in the best light possible so people don't look at you the wrong way or any type of way. But then when you have your disability, they kind of view you a little bit different too. Like you get a little bit of different response because I know I have some, I would say, yeah, I would say, I have some white friends that are visually impaired, and their responses and interactions with the general public always seem a little bit different from the ones I hear from other people that I know that are black. And it's always interesting because I guess we have a lower representation
Mm-hmm.
generally in the disability genre or the field because I mean aside from the only two known,
Yep.
a black visually impaired people that represent us, which is Ray Charles and Stevie Wonder. We don't really have much others. I mean, yes, there's a couple other people that will skate under there. I mean, Harriet Tubman did have a little bit of sight loss. Only just recently I learned about Willie O'Ree, who's the first African American to play in the NHL, and
Mm-hmm.
he also had um, only like he had a he only had about oh, he had 5% of his vision in one eye, and
Yeah.
I think about 95 in the other.
Yeah.
So not only he's like the first African American to play in the NHL, but he's also like one of the first people to play with a reduced sight, which is impressive. But other than that, like you look back and we don't really have much. And everybody always likes to, hate to use that, like stigma of like, they'll like put us they'll put us in that template of either your Stevie Wonder or Ray Charles.
Exactly.
And I always get the where people look at me, well, how do I know that you're blind? I think that I think you're faking, and because I'm not swaying to side when I'm talking like Stevie Wonder, so that's their viewpoint, which is always frustrating because that's the only representation we have, and then we have to like go out there and say, no, there's more. There's me, there's you, there's the other person. You know, there's more of us than you realize. So
Yeah, and the one thing I find is people don't associate the look of a black male with blindness, and especially with you, Muddy. I know you're 6 foot, is it 6'2" or
6 feet,
there? Yeah,
six.
six foot. So it's almost like people associate blind folks with those small meek individuals, and then when here's a black dude who's 6 foot, and then even with myself, a different kind of build, a muscular build, they're like, that person's not blind. Like, what the heck? This is not the person I expect to be, you know?
Right, because they look like they you know look at all people with levels of visual impairment. They don't look at anybody being um a certain type. Like they kind of like would pigeonhole us all. Okay, you're kind of smaller, skinnier, weaker, more helpless than anything else.
Mm,
Then
Ex-
hey, like okay, he's an athlete, he's visually impaired. Like they don't see it that way. So
exactly. And it's interesting because I almost see, looking at blackness, especially black men, and then looking at disability, you look at it as a spectrum, right? And here's a spectrum where it shows vulnerability on one side, and here's a spectrum that shows I don't know, not the word aggressiveness, but what's the right word? Independence, uh, pride. I wouldn't say ego, but just, and I'm gonna
Yeah, a
add,
little bit of ego in there. It's a bit of
yeah,
ego in
yeah,
there.
yeah,
It's,
and just this independence, and then it's just like, okay, so when someone has a disability with a black man, where do they sit on the spectrum? Where like are they turning more to vulnerability because the sight loss, or is it still that black man where it's that independence, that toughness, and it's very interesting that you made mention of the representation of Stevie Wonder because now everybody just knows, oh, Martin Springer, do you play the piano? Like uh,
no.
harmonica, and it's just funny because it's just those stereotypes and it's nothing else that is associated with a black blind man.
I mean, I appreciate everybody would hope that I'm a musical genius like Stevie Wonder. Like,
Yeah.
that's great. And it's always funny when everybody uses those comparisons, and then you get all those understanding background myths. Like how people, like, I've heard a few times people tell stories of, like, apparently Ray Charles used to drive way back in the day. I'm
Mm,
like, okay, but it's hard to find that actual information. But it's stories told by other musicians that would say, yeah, he used to drive. He had one single route and he'd back his car out, drive out, and go back in, which is interesting. Or the myth that comes with Stevie Wonder. Like, you'll hear plethora of people talking about, like, you know, that they don't believe that he's fully blind. Like, I remember watching a clip of Shaq saying he got in the elevator
yeah, I
and
remember that.
Stevie
Yeah.
Wonder came up and he turned to him and called and said, "Hi, Shaq." And Shaq was like, "Yeah, I don't believe you're blind."
Yeah.
Or like, there talks about how he knows his way around the White House. Well, that's true because he's been in the White House as many presidents have been in there. But I mean, it's just things like that where people question, and then they'll turn to us and say, "Oh, so are you like that?" Or my
Mm.
favorite is, they'll compare us to Daredevil.
Mm.
It's like, yeah, I have echolocation. I can catch things not even knowing it's flying in the air. Like, yeah, I don't have all those extra skills, but I do have other skills.
Yeah, yep. And it's definitely a lot of those stereotypes and misconceptions and yeah, it definitely comes hard and it's so funny actually. I don't know if I'm going a little off topic, but I still remember that Eddie Murphy joke about Stevie Wonder. It's like Stevie's a musical genius. He can do anything. Okay, here's the wheel, Stevie. So that's
Yeah,
what
like, this
I
is a skill. Yeah,
yeah, that's what I always think about when I hear driving in Stevie Wonder. But it's so true with representation, and I feel that we're definitely making a difference with speaking about this and
yeah.
showing that yeah, there's black men with sight loss, and
But
there's
I
black
think the issue I have now is, like, I've realized this over the last few years, and as I decided to, push along with my life, like, stop wallowing and start doing more things. I realized that even the overall representation for the visually impaired is really misconstrued because everybody
men.
bases it off what they see on TV and in movies, and it's really damaging to us because we always got to pose with those questions like, oh, are all your senses enhanced? No, you lose one, it kind of balances itself out. It does. All of a sudden I don't get super dog hearing. um it's like my favorite one that I always encounter, and I just recently encountered this too, where someone like, oh my god, you can't see me. I'm like, no, you have no idea what I look like. I'm like, yeah, no. But then they'll proceed, here, you have to touch my face. And I'm like, yeah, this is not a movie. This is not like Ghost or something. Like, this is not a moment for me to feel up your face because, it's not to say it's creepy, but it makes yourself a little uncomfortable. And I just recently had this, like, meeting a friend of mine. Um, he introduced me to a friend of his, and she was like, "Oh my god, like I didn't know that you can't see me. Really, you can't see me?" And I'm like, "No," because of course, he failed to mention that I was visually impaired, which was
Mhm.
funny. But I carry myself like I'm not. I'm like I do have sight, so I guess that's a little bit of a misdirection. But she was like, "Okay, here, touch my face, so you
Mhm.
can feel how, so you can have an idea." And I'm like, "That's really not going to paint the picture any better because." Like I can't see, and what I can feel texture wise is not gonna properly give me what you would expect it to give me.
Yeah, and then
So
no offense to people who want the face touch, but to be honest,
right.
I wouldn't want my face.
Well,
I find it unhygienic. I don't know where those hands have been, and I don't want it on my
that's true.
face.
And it's more of an intimate thing to do. You just
Uh,
don't, want to meet up somebody and here feel me up, because then it's like, yeah, like my kids are used to complain as a kid. When they were kids, I used to touch their face a lot.
yeah.
And I remember one of my friends go like, when you're touching their face, it's like if you're just slapping them hard. I'm like, no, it's not like that. But then they also remind you, like, look at the size of your hand and the size of
Uh-huh.
its face. So yeah. So
Yeah.
thinking about it now, you're looking, you got to go and touch a stranger's face, and you're like mushing up their face. And if they have makeup on, now you have that all in your hand, the
Mhm.
oils. I'm like, no, no,
And then
no, no. We got to get rid of that. That's like the first thing that we have to remove.
for some people, you'd be like, "Oh, there's brow on your face." There's some people, so I know bad listeners. That was a bad joke. That was a bad joke. So you know what? I'm gonna go into my next question, and I
Sure.
find this as is such a unique identity where you are a father, a black father with sight loss, and then you have your kids, and then you have your grandchildren as well. So I want you to share about even that experience, because I know stereotypically a lot of people are like thinking, oh, black father, kids, sight loss, how does he raise his kids? So I want you to kind of share with the audience your experience.
Sure. So lucky enough, I wouldn't say lucky enough, I was able to at least, have the joy of raising my children for a good chunk of their lives. So they made it all the way, almost all the way through not university, through high school. So I had that luxury of at least enjoying that time when they were younger and when they're coming up to being teenagers. The sad part about all of it, especially losing my sight, I had plans to do things with my kids. So it's been a much greater struggle with that. Like when you lose your sight, because
Mm,
like I didn't get a chance to teach my kids how to drive, and that was one of
mm,
my plans. I was like, I was all right, like my daughter was around the, getting ready into the age, and my other daughter, and then my son. And I was like, okay, my plan was all right, like I'm gonna get another car, and then I'm gonna get a like, little beater wagon for them, so they can, learn to drive and maybe potentially drive around. And I also had plans on taking them on trips and
mm,
things, but the sight loss literally derailed that. And the frustrating part about when it derailed it all, that I lost about couple of years of trying to figure out and finding myself while they're still growing up. And
mm,
unfortunately, you know you don't stop being a parent no matter what. So I
mm,
had to like struggle with the sight loss while trying to maintain being a parent. And it's really hard. Like, I'm just happy enough that my kids were old enough when I lost my sight. Because if they were much younger, I don't know how any of this would have turned out.
yeah. And I have a really good feeling. Just I know you, and just how resilient you are. I feel like you would find a way. Like I just know know you. I know you're skilled in the kitchen. I know you have so many different skill sets and adaptability that I
Well,
know you'd find a way for sure.
it's like I said, it was a struggle because the the hardest part was, when I started to lose my sight more and more, I had to become reliant on my children more than I wanted to be. Like they had to
Mm,
fill in uh not only me being a parent, they also had to be like my sighted guide. They had to be my eyes and my hands. And
mm,
they had to at times, like I would say, grow up a little bit more than they should have had to grow up. And I'm upset that that had to happen, but also happy because, it also, helped round them out a little bit more,
mm,
and I'm pretty sure they're a little resentful for, my sight loss and I put all that weight on them. But, you know, when you're single and, the rest of my family was, very supportive, but they came in at a pinch, especially like with technology. Um, the hardest part for me was I'm an IT person, so I'm very technical, but I
yes,
like to know how things work. And when I started to lose my sight, I was using an Android phone.
yes.
Then I realized after having my first intake with the independent living specialist, they're like, you should get an iPhone because it's more designed for, people with disabilities, and it would make things easier. Now, people who know me, I'm not a big Apple person.
Hmm.
Like I've never really, I used to hate Apple. Like I could tell you the amount of times I've touched an Apple device. I've used like the original iMac and iMac 2, and then, like the original Mac. Sorry, let me correct myself. The original Mac, like the Macintosh. I've used the first two versions of that, and I lightly played around with the original iMac, and then I probably touched the iPhone 3GS like twice. So handing me an iPhone and saying, "Here, yeah, figure it out," was not great, especially when I can't see. So I had to rely on my kids because all my kids had iPhones. So they were literally teaching me, which I find so hilarious, about how to use an iPhone. And now I'm much better and I can whiz around on it. But it was a lot for me to rely on them because it was like a lot of stuff that wasn't even accessible at the time when I started losing my sight. Like, now it's interesting how apps are more accessible. But at that time, Uber wasn't really accessible properly. I I struggled ordering food. Amazon, oh my God, it was even a pain in the butt. Like
Hmm.
all that stuff was so hard and it took me so long. And then I was relying on them. I was like, my daughter can, my middle daughter can attest. Like between her, between her and her younger sister and their baby brother, I literally was like on average once a day calling them asking for help, or they were with me, they were helping me out.
Mm,
But now things are much better, and I've adapted and they've gotten better, and they don't need my, I don't use them as much because I've adapted them much more, and I'm really appreciative of my kids. I always give them as much love as I can, and they know it. And I'm happy even more now that I'm a grandfather, and
yeah.
my my little princess is the reason why I do everything now, because I want to make sure that down the road I'm here for her and I can give her as much love and attention as she can get from me.
Oh, no, that's so sweet, Martin. And yeah, I just know that your kids are very proud of you. And uh even what you were making mention of asking for help from your kids and probably asking for help from different family members. And something I find here as men, that whole thing, sometimes men don't like to ask for help. And then you have that whole adage of being a black man because I feel like for generations we were put in us that, oh, you're a man, you shouldn't be asking for help, you could take the world on your own, right? It's
Yeah,
looked
you want
at
to
as,
come off as weak, and
Yeah,
you don't want to
vulnerability.
come off as weak or meek or anything like that. You want to, like, because we have a very strong heritage that we have to uphold. And yeah, I
Exactly.
struggled a lot asking for help. Like, at times I would just suck up and not ask for help, and I didn't even, it took a long while even for me to ask for help from my friends. And my friends always say, "Oh, if you need anything, let me know." And I'm like, oh man, I don't want to ask for help, because I was never, like, I was always the one that they would come to for help. Now I'm like the roles are reversed, and it was very frustrating, to always ask for help, even getting to the point of even, going to CNIB and balance, and getting help there. That was even a struggle for me, because I didn't want to show that, I didn't know anything or I couldn't help myself. But you'll be amazed how fast it humbles you really quick and really hard.
Know what? I was in that same place where I hated asking for help, right? And part of that is obviously that generational thing where men don't ask for help, or having a disability, you're looked at as dependent on other people. And then being a black dude, it's almost a compromise of your intelligence, where it's just like, oh, I have to ask for help. People think I'm dumb, right? But
Right.
just like you say, it humbles you quickly when here's yourself struggling with something, when you could easily just ask, right? And I feel like you look better coming on the other side when you do take away that pride and that ego, and just have that vulnerability. And I feel like it does make you even stronger. The fact that I like to think of it like as an obstacle course or a maze, right? You have someone who's just like, I don't want help. I don't want help through this maze, right? And then you
Yeah.
have someone who like, okay, you know what? I'll take the help that I believe I need, right? Not like you're
Hmm.
depending on if someone all the time and you're codependent. And I could just imagine the person just getting through the maze and then be like, okay, let's go for the dinner while this person's still struggling, be like, don't help me. And they're still stuck at like the first part of it. You know what I mean?
Well, totally. Like, I feel that because of all that, my inability to even, subject myself to asking for help, hindered and hurt a lot of things along the way. Like, I even noticed it when, reflecting back now, when I was at work and my site was going, I didn't know what was happening. I thought it, you think of all these things, like you read and you like study. It's like, oh, it could be my glasses, or or there's something going on. Maybe the monitor I'm staring at is out of phase and it's not sharp or something. And then you make adjustments, and then it got to the point where I didn't even realize it was affecting everything. It was affecting my, like, interesting part. I didn't realize when my site was going that I made changes on my phone that affected even the time my phone was keeping, that
Mhm.
I didn't pick up on. And then, when I was at work, it was affecting my work. It was affecting my work to the point where I wasn't even getting things done properly, because I was just like, I didn't want to ask for help. I didn't even know how to ask for help, because I
Hmm.
didn't even know what was going on. It took my best friend telling me, dude, just go home. Like,
Hmm.
basically, she said, just go home, go to the CNIB, figure out what the hell's going on. And I was like, yeah, I guess I'm gonna have to, because my doctor is sending me to all these doctors, and there's no response, and anything. They're just picking things out in the air, and it's like, oh, it could be this, it could be this, it could be this, and you have to make those tough decisions. And then after that, I realized I should have been asking for help, but shoulda, coulda, woulda. That's always a thing. After the fact, you can realize and reflect and see that, hey, that's when you
Hmm.
should have done something.
Yeah, and it is good that you went at the time and you looked at what was going on and you seek that support and eh, just the resources. Because think of it, if you were a stubborn person and you're like, I'm just gonna play this through, I'm not gonna use a cane even though my vision's getting worse. I'm going to just treat everything like it's the same. Look at where you could have ended up harmed. You could have ended up hurt. So I think
Yeah.
it's a blessing for sure. The fact that yeah, you went to seek program and support at that time for sure.
Well, it did take a while for me to get used to using my cane, though. Like I remember I got my cane, I think it was like October, and I started my I think it was October, November. I started doing my training, and I didn't leave the house with my cane until like sometime December.
Mm,
Like I still had enough sight that I mastered the art of following people.
yeah.
So, with my field of vision narrowed so much that I had to tilt my head to look down. So I would walk with my head tilted slightly down and watching the people in front of me, which is not the safest thing in the world, but I was able to navigate my way around with no problem. I didn't realize until after I did my first set of O&M training that I was like, oh, okay, this is what it does. This is what it helps me with.
Mm,
But I still didn't want it to walk with a cane because I didn't want to show that I was visually impaired. It was like, that level of embarrassment, in the beginning,
mm,
like, crap. It's like when you, case in point, when I tore my Achilles, I didn't want to walk with the air cast on. I didn't want to walk with
mm,
using the crutches because I felt like I didn't want that extra set of pity. But
yeah.
then you realize it's not pity, it's help.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. Exactly. And I feel like when you have that mindset where yeah, you're like everybody's looking at me for pity and kind of victimizing yourself. I did it before. I done it before, and I almost feel like when you start taking that self-victimization where everybody feels bad for me and you're just like no one really gives a damn. And
yeah.
I'm just like another dude and you're like, yeah, the way I am, right?
Yeah,
Oh,
and that's the thing is like, it takes a little bit to get to that point. Like then you realize the interesting part is you always find out, in the midst of all that, how your family's going to react when you actually embrace it and how your friends react, because then your friends are like, oh, okay, you need that. We're willing to do that for you.
yeah.
And then you have that. But in the beginning, when you're like, oh, I don't want to do this. And then they're like, okay, what's the hell's going on? Like, you just
And
gotta have that. At some point you just gotta suck it up, and it's hard to suck it up
yeah,
and
and
embrace it.
the one thing, and I'm gonna let the audience and the listeners know that you are the man in the kitchen. You're like the Black Emerald Lagache, or who? No one listens to Emerald Lagache or watches him anymore. But you're like the Black Gordon Ramsay minus the meanness. You know what I mean? You
Yeah,
yeah, you put it down in the kitchen for sure, and I feel like that's a way where it shows like you're independent, right? You
pretty
are,
much.
yeah, you're
Yeah.
independent in ways and forms, and not codependent in everything for sure.
No, it took me a little bit to get comfortable. Like I think the advantage for me was I was already, like I was cooking. I've been cooking since I was a child because my mother felt that, you know, always the funny story, like my mom just made this decision and says, like either you when you come home from school, you got to make yourself something to eat because no one's going to go buy you McDonald's. So, it was you start off learning how to boil hot dogs, and then you learn how to boil eggs, and you learn how to fry an egg, and then so I've been cooking on and off for a little bit, and then when my kids came along, I had to ramp up my cooking skills and my knowledge. And I spent a lot of time watching the Food Network. So I always adapted here and there. And, you know, I won't say I'm great. I just said I'm okay. I'm pretty good. I can cook when need be. And I prefer to cook for people than cook for myself. And, the transition to losing my sight, the good part was I was still cooking. I was still living on my own when I lost my sight. So I had to I had to use certain things I didn't anticipate I would have to use. Like
Mhm.
when cooking, I like before I would just be very um what's the best way to say it? Just very, open and fluid. I wouldn't have to worry about times or anything like that. And you just throw it on and you just kind of play around with it and you look at it. the loss of sight took away a lot because, like when you're cooking certain things, you need to look and see if it's cooked or not. I had to adapt to the fact that I had to overcook things and then work
Mm,
my way backwards. I had
mm,
to start listening to how things are cooking. And then I have to start timing things because, it's like I had to relearn how to cook a steak properly because I was cooking a steak too much. Now I was
mm.
like, all right, I put a timer on. It's like 6 minutes, 3 minutes one side, 3 minutes the other, or I flip it and flop back and forth. And, like the things I haven't mastered or I'm able to do while I'm visually impaired is to bake properly because
Mm,
you need a little bit of sight for that. And you know thankfully I've successfully pulled off one or two things when I bake, but normally I try to just stick to just cooking food. Like I don't fry, but I oven fry. So, and I just starting to get my skills with using an air fryer now. So, you know, the one thing I do miss able to cook is I can't. I've done it a couple of times. I don't highly suggest it for people, but I have cooked on the barbecue a couple of times. I've had assistance,
mm.
but the problem with the barbecue, you get flare ups and whatnot. I could still light the barbecue. That's not a problem, but
Yeah.
cooking on it properly is always a little bit of difficulty.
Yeah, and know what's actually funny? Like, I rather the barbecue, but I have a gas barbecue, so it makes it a little bit easier. So
Mm.
yeah, but yeah, I rather I love the barbecue, especially some good steaks for sure. So, uh, so another question I have for you, and this is geared towards the sight loss community, even Black men with sight loss who want to
Oh,
be potential fathers and kind of having that fear of I have sight loss. How am I supposed to drive my kid to practice? How am I supposed to drive them to doctor's appointments? What's your advice for individuals who feel that way?
well, that's really hard. It's interesting part out of all this is since I've lost my sight and I've been part of the visually impaired community and I'm starting to branch out and meet more and more people, I still find that I'm a little bit of an anomaly.
Yeah.
That there's not. I haven't encountered a lot of people that have children that have sight loss. Which not to say there isn't. I know some have lost sight, much later, but very few of them that would have lost sight, when their kids were somewhat younger. And I've struggled with that whole picking up and dropping off thing because I like my son was playing hockey and after a while I couldn't enjoy him playing hockey or like when my other kids were doing things I couldn't enjoy that. Like I missed graduation because it was too hard for me to get out there. So for everybody nowadays, I mean, we do have the advantage of depending where you are, there's wheel trans or there's uh, another option like that, or you can Uber, but all that it's going to just take up a lot of money. And you know, for future parents, I would just say, you have to think it through. Uh, if you're both visually impaired, I have no idea how you're going to pull it off. I mean, for me, over the time, I've always dipped into my previous, you know, parenting skills, like raising 5 kids. I have a boatload of nieces and nephews, some related, not all related, but I've, my friends, and I've assisted with them with their kids and helping raise and offering up information when it needs to be. And then realizing nowadays, uh, the realm of being a parent has drastically changed since I raised my kids because they said before a kid like the investment for a kid was like about 100 grand when we were a lot younger. Now the investment for a kid is at least a good million because you know things are way more expensive. So I know
Mm,
even for us in the visually impaired community, a disability community in itself, I mean, you weren't able to afford that with ODSP. You have to make sure that you have some kind of funds. And, really, if you're going to look at getting kids, or well, getting kids, let me rephrase it. If you're looking to have kids,
Mm,
I would suggest um, spending some time with someone who has kids at all age levels. Um, One of the things that I say that was a turning point for me, it must have been about 2000, was it 2017? It's probably 2017. I was already home, from work, off on LTD, and I was just coming off of feeling really into myself. And my best friend, who's also like my air quotes, my work wife,
mm,
uh, she was home on uh, maternity leave with her youngest son. Well, with her youngest, which is, a son. Um, and she decided, hey, I'm home. You're home. You're not doing anything. I miss hanging out with you. Come and stay with me for a couple of days. And I was like, you know what? Okay, this is great because it will get me out of the house. Make me more interactive, and I'm not wallowing in myself.
yeah.
And it turned out that couple of days ended up pretty much 3 weeks. uh, the great part was because her son was coming up to 1 years old, and he was at that age of he was crawling and whatnot. I was interacting with him. I was playing with him. I was trying to teach him how to walk. And this kid would get on the ground and dart fast, 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 fast. Like, I mean, if we put him in like baby crawling races, I know this boy would win.
Mm,
But the part that kind of threw her off was I was keeping up with him and I could find him because I was listening to him, and it helped me develop some skills that I didn't realize I had and I could utilize, like using a bit of echolocation, just using, knowing your environment enough so you know how to maneuver around it and all that. And I was just like racing around behind him all the time, and he was crawling. And and the thing is, you have to be fast because he would always find his way to the dog's food and always try to pull at
mm.
his food. So if you weren't fast, that's about it. And I had to keep up with him, and she was quite impressed with that. And even then, it was like I would sit down and play with him, and then sometimes I would, it became almost a daily thing. I'd put him down for a nap, and she was amazed at how well I can just, get him down for a nap. And I said, no, it's not a problem. I had kids, but it also helped me, realize and, you know, not just realize, like just embrace the fact that I have a new set of skills, and it
Mm,
was good. And, it's something that I feel if future parents want to have, I think they need to interact with kids at all levels. Like with my granddaughter, who's going to be 2 in May, I've been around her since, I always say this, and people always find it funny, fresh out of the package. When she was born,
mm.
like I was holding her and feeding her like 5 days after she was born. Um, I was helping my daughter take care of her all the time. Like I practically lived with her for about almost 6 months. I was up there all the time, spending time day in, day out. And, she was quite impressed. Like I was like, I would put her to, like when she would wake and when she would cry out of, like when she would wake up and start crying, I knew where to find her. I knew how to get her out of her seat or out of her playpen or where she was. And I would take her up. I would carry her, it got to the point where I can even feed her. And then, so all those all that just helped, build up the skill set to where I'm at now. And I'm more comfortable. Like even now that at 2, I can take care of her for a couple of hours by myself. She'll run around, but
Mm.
I know where she is. And she'll be with me. Like I've changed her diapers a few times already. Not the poopy ones, but the wet ones. But I've changed her diaper. I will, I put her in her high chair. I'll give her dinner to eat or lunch to eat, and she'll eat. Like, so it's not that difficult for me because I've,
Yeah.
had the previous experience. But for, people who don't have that previous experience, I would suggest that you get some experience.
Mm.
Embrace that, see if that's what you're willing to put that time and effort into, because it's a lot of time and a lot of effort. And you think it's hard now being visually impaired, throw a kid in there and it makes it a lot harder.
Yeah, I could definitely imagine, and definitely what I got from you is just that adaptability, right? And
Mhm.
to get those resources, and I feel like you're a perfect resource for anybody who is thinking to have kids. Someone like me, if I ever do have a kid, I'm definitely tap on you and get that advice. So thank you so much for providing that. We're
Oh,
running out of some time, or we're running out of time. So I'm just
already?
wondering, yeah, oh, that's what happens with the Lens Living Diverse. We just fly through a conversation, and this was such an
All right.
amazing conversation. Any last words out of all everything we had a conversation about? Anything you want to let the listeners know?
Well, as one couple of quotes I always I like to go by, like, life moves pretty fast. You don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it. And I've never sucked that in until I got much older and I realized how much I miss out on, since I just took time for granted. And that's always the thing. You don't want to take time for granted. You want to utilize as much as possible. You want to do as much as you can, when you can, and however you can. Because, I'm playing the shoulda, coulda, woulda game more than I should have been. And I should have taken the opportunity to do more things, like to go take my kids on trips, be more interactive, do more stuff for myself. You know, I'm going to be 50 soon. Scares the crap out of me, but I there's still so much more I have on my plate to do that I didn't get to do, and I feel that, you know not that I wasted my time. I just feel that I didn't utilize the time as much as I should have, and now I'm trying to make up for it.
Mm.
Um, Also, you know, it's it's okay if you go dark. I mean, we all have those times when we get really dark. You just have to learn to rely on the people you surround yourself with. I have a pretty good set of friends, I would say. Some some of them actually have gone to the depths of reaching in and making sure pulling me out of dark places. And I appreciate that. You know, like my best friend, my work wife, she's done a lot to make sure that I don't get into those, deep places, and always telling me to come out and stealing me and abducting me to her house. And it's funny because her partner is like, "Oh, I guess we adopted Marty now." So so it's always good, and I'm like, "Yeah, it's okay." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm happy for that." It puts a smile on my face and makes things good. And I have other friends that would just call and check on me. Just one of my other friend, she would, in the beginning, she just made every effort to call me every other day just to
Mm.
make sure I was okay. And then, you know, I appreciate that, because that, helped me out a lot. And then I have other friends that would say, "Hey, just don't sit at home. Come over to my house.
Mm.
Come and hang out. We don't have to go out anywhere, but we hang out." And that got me to the point where I'm at now, where I'm more comfortable going out. And I got, like a whole new set of other friends. We do a whole bunch of things. And that's what you just need to do. I mean, it's hard to come out of the shell, but you're going to have to try to. And, you know, darkness is there. It's not going to go away. It's part of the balance of life. Not to quote, Star Wars, but we need that balance. There is darkness, there is light. You can get sucked into the darkness and feel all sad, but, you know, you also have to think about the stuff that makes you happy. And, you know, my shining point, is a lot of the things I did, but right now, like, my granddaughter is my son, is my light, is what keeps me going and keeps pushing me more and more forward. And I think everybody needs something like that. It doesn't matter if it's a person, a place, a thing. just something you just need to focus on, and you'll be amazed how much better things will get.
Wise words from our wise man. Thank you so much, Marty. Thank you for being on today's episode, and
Thank you for having me.
definitely, we'll get you on another episode for sure.
Sure, why not? I had really enjoyed this.
So thank you everybody for listening to the Lens Living Diverse. What a wonderful episode with Martin. So if you like today's episode and episodes in the past, you could press the like or subscribe on your favorite platforms. Also, for more information about the CNIB diversity and inclusion, you can visit www.cnib.ca and then go to the advocacy portion and then visit We Are CNIB, where you could get your fill of diversity and inclusion. And then last but not least, if you have any feedback or interested in being a part of the Lens Living Diverse, you could email us at advocacy@cnib.ca. Once again, advocacy@cnib.ca. So once again, I was your host for today, Ben, and thank you for listening to the Lens Living Diverse. Peace.